The show starts in 3, 2, and 1. Welcome everyone back to the show, Drippy Faucet Podcast, with your host, Jesus Flores, also known as J Flo to some of the kids in the neighborhood. And so today, I feel very honored to have my prima on the show, Noemi Roman. She went to UCLA. She has, I believe, a wealth of knowledge that I hope to explore today and ultimately be able to share with you guys. But you don't know her yet. So let's kind of get to know her a little bit. Where are you from? And what is a restaurant that you really enjoyed from that neighborhood?
So I'm going to start with, I don't know that I know myself either. So we might figure out who I am as well today. So I grew up in Bell Gardens, born and raised, and I'm still here. Favorite restaurant, you know, it's not like a favorite restaurant where I love to go eat, but I think that there's a lot of memories that go with that. And there's, and I feel like a lot of people know about it, El Pescador. And I feel like that was like our Sunday, we had our Sunday meals sometimes there, and they were like your fancy. Like,
really?
Yeah. So it's a Mexican restaurant.
Where is it located though? Like what streets? What intersection?
Now it's on Florence, and it's on Eastern and Eastern and something.
Okay.
But it's right by the Food for Less. But it used to be like a little hole in the wall, and
really?
the owner was he had all these kids. He had like maybe 13 kids, and the thing is that you always knew the history because we were there all the time. That then you knew the history of this man who had 13 kids, and his plan was to open up a restaurant so he could leave a restaurant to each one of his kids, and he did actually.
Really?
Yeah. So now El Pescador is like revamped and it's super pretty, and now it's like like a fancy. It's not super high end, but it's just like your Sunday. This is where you go celebrate birthdays.
Okay, I get it.
But
so you mentioned that it's significant, not necessarily because the food was bomb, but because there's some memories there.
Yeah.
What is one memory that really brings it back to life?
In general, from
your childhood, teenage years, whatever.
Well, you know, I remember there was a lot of playtime out in the streets. I grew up with 2 older brothers, and I feel like they did a lot of playing and horsing around and with the kids in the neighborhood. And so there was always like football, basketball happening out on the street. And I think that is what I remember, even though I wasn't like playing with them. I just remember that being like the time where we also in the summers got to just be outside and hang out with like the neighbors. And you know, then I'd like do other stuff like roller skating, while they played football or while they played basketball, and they take out the basketball court out into the street.
So would you say that you didn't really have like the typical like girl upbringing where you were playing with like dolls and like painting your nails and like doing your hair and like playing like teacup with other girls?
I did, but I also had a very particular experience growing up because I was the youngest and I was the only girl. There weren't other kids my age either. Yeah. So I tended to just kind of like have to watch the older kids play. Yeah. I mean, you know, when you're little, you can't play with anybody because you're little.
Yeah, you lack certain skills.
Right, but I think it just was also not in my interest to do those kinds of things because, I got to see all these other activities and people being active that I wanted to also be active and be outside.
Yeah.
So it wasn't your typical girl experience.
Okay, all right. So I imagine you went to Bell Gardens High School. And how well did you do? Were you a good student? Were you a bad student? Take me through a typical day in Bell Gardens High School.
Well, I was a straight A student in Bell Gardens High School.
Nice.
It was always a goal but I was also tracked. So
what does that mean? What does it mean to be tracked?
So I think that from the age of when I was, I think in kindergarten, because I knew how to read, I got labeled as a gifted student.
Don't you just love being labeled?
Yeah. Well, some labels apparently work, right? And I actually was just having a conversation with someone about this, that it was like a double-edged sword because I did get labeled as a gifted student, and there was like the time that gifted program where how it served a purpose was to track those students who were like high achieving and were just really smart.
Right.
And you track them and you always make sure that you're putting them into the classes
that they need to be in.
That they need to be
so you
in,
can maximize,
or with the good teachers. because then they're being taken care of, right? And then your file always said,
gifted.
Gates, they were like, the program was
Gate
called
program.
Gate. Yeah. And so what I was talking to someone about was that while this was great, it also did I had another effect where, like, then because I was just told I was special all the time, and you're so special and you're so smart, and that was constant, you're a GATE student.
Did it kind of fill your head up?
No, it sets these expectations, right? That I now have to perform at this level all the time. Which then what happens is that then it elicits these feelings of perfectionism and having to be perfect that follow you, I think, for the rest of your life.
So how did that affect you? Would you say that overall it had a positive impact in your life? Or do you think that it actually had like a very low-key detrimental impact in your life?
I mean, I can't say that it was detrimental because I think that I've gotten this far because of that. Okay. But I also realize and acknowledge that it doesn't have the same effect on everyone.
Okay.
And I think that because of, I think I whatever it might have been, I think that because I got help in order to be able to deal with these things that were coming up, right? I learned how to manage them, but it came up when I was at UCLA because, I've been told my entire life, you're special, you're smart, you're so smart. And then I'm in high school, right? And then that gets like,
you're rocking it in a small pond.
And it's verified because I'm in straight A's, and then, I'm college bound. I am in every honor roll, like, and everybody's always talking about, like, Noemi, yeah, she's like, I was number 3. Like for a long time. So everybody's always talking about you and everybody knows you. Right. Because you're special. Right. And then you get to UCLA where there's just like this huge ass school, right? And you think you're prepared because I'm smart. Because you got straight A's. Because I'm smart. And then I failed like one of my first classes. And I felt so stupid.
How did that feel?
I felt stupid.
Did you really feel stupid, or did you feel like you weren't prepared?
No, my initial thoughts were, I'm stupid, I don't belong here, and I don't belong here. Yeah. Like, I've been told a lie. Sure. And you start questioning, like, everything that everybody has always told you, and you really start feeling like, I really don't belong.
So if there was one thing that you wish you would have known before entering such an elite space of academia, what would that thing be? Or maybe even a couple things that you wish someone would have been like, look, Noemi, you're about to hit a huge ass wall, and I want you to know the following.
And I was told that. And I did. And because I was fortunate enough to have developed friendships with people who were older, who had gone to college before I did, and then that I kept in touch with, that came back and were like, yo, like, this is what it's been like for us. And so I think that no matter how many times they told me, I wasn't prepared because in my mind I was still feeding myself this story that, like, nah, like, I'm gonna be good, like, I'm gifted, I can special. Do this. So and in all honesty though, I think that it was a very much needed experience because I think it humbled me and it made me have to, like, realize, hey, you're not that I wasn't as smart, but I was like, all right, well, now I gotta go get tutoring. Now I gotta go look for the resources, and I've got to start talking to people about, like, how do I not fail this class, because here I was thinking, like, oh yeah, I got this. So I think it served its purpose to at least open up the doors of me finding spaces where there was people that looked like me, who were also struggling. And it was also just really important to also share that experience with other people of color at UCLA and feel like, you're struggling too? Oh, you also were told you were special. Right. And then, and then, like, I failed. It's like, oh. So it makes that solitary experience feel more shared.
Like, I guess out of curiosity, who were the students that were able to, I guess from the beginning of their entrance into UCLA as freshmen, who were those students that right off the bat were able to be successful and not feel what you felt? Because I'm just curious to see and draw connections between kids that came from where you came from, which would be like this Bell Gardens, Southeast LA area, versus perhaps the brilliant kid from Palisades or Malibu or Huntington Beach, etc.
I wish I could speak more to that. I didn't know. I mean, to me, what it seemed like was that obviously the kids who were probably coming from more affluent homes, who were white for sure, were I perceived as being more successful. Or they were being more successful, and again, I just knew that also off the bat. Like, I had a roommate whose mom was a nurse, and so I don't remember what her dad was, but they were middle class and had always also gotten the resources when she was in high school. And I remember, like, she didn't struggle as much as I did. She wasn't studying as hard as I did. She was able to party a lot more because she wasn't worried about, like. Because she knew, and she knew, it seemed like at least she knew what she was doing. Whether she was or not, obviously, I don't know.
That's a whole different thing.
Right, but I also, even within, like, people of color that I knew, there were some people of color who grew up in the similar spaces, in the similar neighborhoods that I grew up in, but their schooling was different. And so they either went to magnet schools or they were bused to affluent areas with better schools. That then also set them up a little bit higher for success, and they just were able. Their discipline was different. For sure. And I think that's also how I noticed that there was a difference. So people with a little bit more of a discipline, and I also their analytical skills, and they were able to, like, process things that I was like, whoa, like, that's like way over my head.
Right.
And again, I was thinking, like, but I've, like, been analytical, but their analytical skills were just at higher standard.
All right. So today, whether it be a small thing, a big thing, what are you really curious about? What do you want to get your hands on? What do you want to get your mind on? What do you want to discover? What do you want to work on?
I just want to discover, like, what this is, what this does for you. More importantly, like, the podcasting, but also, like, what I can do to also just share what I do know. And how can I also just share what I know so that then we can reach out to more people, because I think it's important. I try to reach out to people within my spaces and within my work line, for sure, but I do definitely think that it's needed to reach out to larger.
All right, well, I'm so happy that you're very curious about my podcasting adventures, and I'll get into that. But, like, you in, like, your life, is there anything in particular that, like, really, like, strikes your curiosity and you're like, you know what, like, I'm gonna read this book, I'm gonna work in this field, like, I want to figure this thing out?
I'm curious about everything all the time, and I'm curious. I'm just always asking questions, and I'm always curious about. But obviously, within the line that I do, the work that I do, I'm always curious about human behavior and why people do the stuff they do, and how do you just, like, how do you just move around life?
In your opinion, what is the weirdest shit that human beings do?
Oh, man.
I mean, it could be a long list of it, but, like, one thing that really irritates you, or you're just like, why?
I mean, there's a lot of things, but I'm going to speak to something that has just happened more recently.
Yeah, for sure.
It's, like, privilege, and how people walk around with privilege, and how that works, and how we pass that on.
Okay.
Right? Because I think that while we might be disenfranchised in certain areas, we're still privileged. And so I also am curious as to, like, how do I then also pass that on, and in what ways is privilege, sometimes is privilege toxic, or is it not helpful, and how do I not perpetuate that? So, I mean, again, I'm always asking questions about a lot of different things because I'm a curious human being too. And how do we improve ourselves too? But more importantly, how do we improve our communities?
Yeah. So I think you can definitely spend, like, the rest of your life trying to figure out those questions. And I think those are, like, very valuable questions that we need to keep asking ourselves over and over and over, even though sometimes it just gets tiring. And you're just like, at what point am I going to stop thinking about this stuff? Because at one point, I think that at one point it just stops being productive in a sense. And it might even be counterproductive to our human spirit, where we keep trying to figure things out and we want to be super woke, and then eventually we're like, damn, bro, I can't even enjoy my life anymore.
I agree, and I think that I think that the personality I carried when I was in college, And I think that happens a lot in college because we're being introduced to so many new things
All
that
this
you've
theory.
never questioned.
Yeah.
And then you start questioning everything. And then you realize it's exhausting. And then you're like, okay, I can't be fucking like questioning everything.
Yeah.
But I think that's something that I've learned in the last couple of years is having purpose with why we are questioning things and being mindful of like, what is my purpose when I am being critical of this. And I think that one of those things is that when I'm thinking about where like that it's not overthinking and just ruminating, but that I'm thinking about like, is this affecting something, or is this something I can change? But also being mindful that we are evolving human beings, and so that even if we're thinking about something right now, how we respond to it in the overthinking 5 years from now is also going to be, or we might have a different response.
Okay.
Because we're changing all the time.
Yeah. And I can personally attest to that because I'm already a different person. You know, and we're going to tap into a lot more of this like therapy stuff in a little bit. But like, for example, recently in my Hombre Círculo, I was talking about how I'm beginning to feel a little bit of shame for having these like ideological shifts that I was once so
held strongly to,
ardent about.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just kind of like, it's okay. You know, like we're all gonna change at the end of the day, and hopefully we change for the better.
And I think I'm glad you bring that up because I think that and it is one. I think it's an age thing because I felt the same way and I felt guilty for a long time because I was seeing this shift also in myself of like, why am I not holding so strong to these things, and feeling like, am I letting go of this part of who I was? And I think that is what it was, that there's a grieving process of like, this is who I was. Yes, this is who I was in college, and it served a purpose to be this way, and I am extremely grateful for that experience. For sure. Because I think it was needed at the time. But sometimes there's things that you also have to like let go of because maybe you no longer need them because you've transcended that. And so then again, like it's about questioning your values. And again, our values also change as we change as people because we change in roles, right? We become like we're students, and then we become professionals, and then maybe we become teachers, and then we become parents. And all of those things come with different roles and expectations. Right. That thing we held on to when we were in college may not be as effective when we're parents.
I get you.
Or that as a parent now you're saying like, yeah, I don't know. You have to find balance, right? And I think that's why it's also good to be reflective and be okay that things are gonna change because they will. And with that, I think when I went through that phase, I also had to let go of certain people because of that. Because some people were also not shifting where I was shifting to. And even now, in wherever I'm at now, I find that there's people who I'm having to let go. Because like we're not sharing the same values and perspectives.
And I think that's really tough. You know, because there's some people that have been your day ones. You know, and they've been there with you for the past 12 years, and then maybe something happens between you guys that is just kind of like, all right, dog, I gotta dip. Like, you know, I can say that because I had this best friend, Alan, when we were little kids. Like, I was 7, and, you know, by like age 17, like we just stopped talking to each other, and then I reconnected like a couple years back, and like he just kept trying to hit me up, and like I was just like, Alan, I love you, but I just can't vibe with you anymore. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I can definitely feel that. What is one thing that you failed at in the past? Because, you know, there's this thing, you know, sometimes people watch you and they say, well, you know, you're like this important person. You went to a big school. You think you're perfect, you know, at least from the outside. So it does take a little bit of vulnerability. But, like, what is one thing that you failed at that maybe you're proud of, maybe you're not proud of, but you failed, but it actually helped you become better? Well,
the concept of failure is also something that I've also been working on. on reconceptualizing
what is failure,
what it means,
what it
means to me. I think failure is something that is so subjective that it can mean something different to everybody.
Sure.
But in the context of what society sees as failure, right? I think that for me, what I felt like that other, what society has told me might be failure is my marriage and having and being divorced, right? And that's huge in the society we live in, where there's a lot of shame tied into it, and shame tied into like that if your marriage doesn't work, it means you failed. And I think that was the most difficult part about getting through the divorce, was reshaping my thinking about what it meant, and that it wasn't a failure, but that it was part of a very much needed experience in order for me to grow. And that had that not happened, then I would have not grown in the ways that I have grown in the last, couple of years since then.
Right.
And while I was on my way into this, I was already on my way into this growth process, because I was like, just questioning and challenging myself to just be a different person. That particular experience just kind of like sped up that process and was like, this is where you're at now. So I mean, I don't perceive it as a failure, but I would say that if we're thinking about like what other people might think,
by society standards,
and I know people like my parents probably think that I failed.
But I mean, also like our parents, they're just coming from a whole different like generation, a whole different like set of values, and like being like quite frank, I wouldn't say that my parents had a successful marriage.
Right.
They're together, they live together, but do they love each other?
Right.
That's I think is a better question to ask. And if it's like, if you don't even love each other, then is this successful? Because marriage is supposed to be about love more than so like an economic
or whatever it's supposed
matter.
To be about, right? And I think that was difficult, was figuring out what I wanted marriage to be and mean. And because I was coming from these ideas of what was being told marriage is, and what I had been shown marriage was, which was, you stick by
just
people.
Thug it out.
You just you don't gotta love people. You just gotta like live with them.
Yeah, that's so horrible.
Right, that in a moment where you're kind of questioning, like, is this somebody I want to be with? You're also like questioning, well, what are the set of values that I have? And do I want to repeat those same cycles, or do I have to come up with some new set of values for myself? Right, because then whatever I'm setting up for myself, I'm also setting up for future generations.
Right.
That there's different expectations now. And you know what? Like, maybe I don't gotta be with somebody that I don't love, or that who's not respectful, or I'm not respecting, or where it's just not working out. Just for the sake of being with someone and not being lonely. So you do start questioning these things, and again, it's about like, but then you think, but are people gonna think I'm a failure? So it is difficult to question these things while also having to look into yourself as to, but what do I really want for myself and for the future? So.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about that whole scenario, to me, it just seems like a nightmare scenario that might feel like it never ends. And I don't know if you've ever felt like that in real life, but I can definitely remember a dream where I'm just like, fuck, like I know I'm dreaming, but this shit sucks. And then sometimes that's replicated in real life, where you're stuck in a situation where you're suffering, but we always put ourselves in that situation. And I totally just feel like that was one of those scenarios that at the end of the day, you still found yourself coming out of a failure.
Well, and I think that you touched upon a good point, which is the suffering piece, right? And I think that was difficult about that process also was the not wanting to suffer, and the not wanting to hurt, and not wanting to feel the pain and the sadness and the anger and all the negative feelings that are elicited when you're going through something so difficult. You're like, I want to avoid the suffering. And I remember my brother, like said, you know what, like sit with it. Sit with that. Sit with the really bad feelings for a while. And I think that was the best advice I could have gotten, because I was like, you know what, yeah, I'm just going to sit and just experience all that sadness, because I think it was that allowed me to then, all right, so I did it, and then I'm moving. And it just moves you forward versus avoiding. And then when you start avoiding the suffering and the pain, and then that's when I think it leads into a lot of other like destructive things, or you avoiding feeling the pain, then a lot of the time leads people to like be stagnant and not act, right? And just stay and just be and continue to be and stay without like doing anything or making any changes or making any decisions.
For sure.
And so I think that being able to like accept that like, all right, this is really shitty and I'm really like having a terrible time and it is a nightmare. But you know what? I'm just gonna acknowledge that it's a nightmare and maybe one day I'm gonna see the light.
Right, for sure.
And then when you see the light, right, it's just so much more.
It's unreal, I bet.
It's so much more empowering because you're like, dang, I can't believe like I was there and then now you're here.
Yeah.
And it's a really wonderful feeling to see yourself like come out of that.
Yeah, just honestly, just thinking about that kind of gives me anxiety. Which at the end of the day, everything gives me anxiety. Right. So it's like, whatever, dude. Which kind of takes me to my next question, which is like, when did you see your first therapist? And in fact, like, I'll answer that question first. I saw my first therapist when I was experiencing a lot of anxiety that I don't think I'd ever felt before in my life. I like to say that it was triggered by this adult life that I had never really lived before. I started teaching, I started doing all these different things, and whatever it was, I just started feeling a lot of anxiety for many different reasons. So I went to go see a therapist.
How did you know it was anxiety? This is me in therapist mode.
So for me, when I feel anxiety, it's basically like, when you feel really nervous.
Okay.
And I get it in my chest and I just start feeling like a bunch of needles being pierced.
Okay.
And it's like this never ending nervousness that sometimes causes me to shake a little bit. But the shaking, you can't really see. It's like internal. Mm-hmm. So I went to...
okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So some people do actually like get the shakes.
Well, I'll get the shakes if it's like
fidgety.
If I really messed up and I know I messed up and I feel like
but otherwise it's just happening internally.
Exactly. I went to go see this therapist in like Hollywood area.
Oh,
like
that's where you.
Yeah. It was through the insurance. I was just I needed something. Okay. At the time I felt like I really needed something. So I went out there. I take a seat. And it's this white woman, and she had green eyes, and I could just feel like she was like staring into me with nothingness. And I was like, damn, bro.
She was probably thinking like, you're an interesting white-looking man.
So I might as well just look at the same way that I'm looking at this camera, and this camera has no feelings at all. That's exactly what I was talking to. So after that, I just said, screw this. Like, this lady is just reflecting what I'm saying, and it's just so annoying. And she would just ask me like, okay, so that's cool, what else? And I was just like, nah, dog, like I could just do this in a mirror, So I didn't go back. I let some time go by, and then I was like, this is not gonna work, It's not for me. Whatever. Some time passed, things got worse, so then I was like, okay, I need to figure it out. I need to go do something. So I started doing some research. I went to this place called Southern California Counseling Center.
Okay.
The thing is that I was on a waiting list there.
Oh yeah.
For like months.
Yes.
Things got worse.
Yeah.
Right? And then finally I met this woman. Her name was Paulina. She was pretty cool. Like, she was a Mexicana, an immigrant. She was actually a student because at that place they only allow you to be worked on by students, and these students are under supervision. You know what I mean?
An intern, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, honestly, I didn't expect much of it because I knew she was a student. And it was funny because at the same time, I was an intern teacher.
Oh, okay.
So, like, I knew that she wasn't going to be a complete expert. But I was like,
you're also not a complete expert.
Let's experiment. Let's experiment together.
Yeah.
It was a fun time. We explored a couple things. She basically made me feel like there was nothing wrong with me.
Oh, okay.
Like I was just kind of pretty much in my head. And so it was all right. But I've had different experiences in different places. When did you first see a therapist?
My very first therapist was when I was 14.
14?
Maybe 15.
Interesting.
I think I was in 10th grade. Yeah, so maybe 15. And I was going through some difficult things.
You were 14
14, 15, I remember I was in 10th grade, and my brother, the oldest one, Manuel, had just gotten married, and then my other brother had just left to school at Berkeley. And I was left at home by myself, basically, with my parents.
It felt that way.
But it felt that way, and it was just such a shift, because you're growing up with these two people all your life, and then out of nowhere, they're gone. And then also it was like, and it's also a very special time as a teenager, because I'm going through all this stuff, obviously, where there's all this stress and
pimples.
Yeah. Puberty, right? But also just the stressor of school.
Yeah.
And having these expectations of wanting to go to college and having to just go above and beyond.
Right.
And my mom not understanding that. And in that role that they played for me was to always advocate for me. And so whenever like I needed something, they always like spoke for me, basically. And then my mom would always just like let me do it, because they were like,
I'm the parent, I know better.
She's gonna do it. And so, but then now they're gone, so now there's nobody advocating for me. And so then that created a lot of conflict between me and my mom. That aside from just now that I'm home by myself with my parents, I'm now privy to a lot of things that were happening that I maybe wasn't before between them. Because now I'm the only one there, so my mom is telling me things that she wasn't telling me before, and then so there was just so much going on that I was like, yo, and I started feeling and I, unlike you, right, for me it was then depressive, right? And so then my reaction was I had depressive symptoms, and how that got displayed was just like this really negative thinking, and then the negative, like the sulking and feeling like I wasn't worthy, and like nothing I did was enough, and then just feeling like really bummed out, but also being extremely irritable, and having a lot of fights with my mom, and having a lot of conflict, and not really knowing why, and where it was stemming from. And because I've always just been a curious kid and a curious person, I was like, I really need to figure out like why this is happening and what do I do about it? Because it's gonna get in the way of me like being able to continue to focus in school, for me to be able to like, obviously like if I can't focus, then I can't get straight A's, and then I can't go to college. So
big problem.
And I almost want to say that there was moments where it got to the point, I think there was a point where I really felt like I no longer wanted to live, because I was just like, this is exhausting. And it wasn't like I had a plan. I think it was just like one of those feelings where you're just like, you know what, maybe it'd just be better if I just wasn't like alive.
Yeah.
And I remember the feeling and thinking like, but I don't want to die. What the fuck,
It must be such a conflict.
Right. And then you're like, what the fuck? Like, no. So then I was like, I need to tell someone. And I told my mom. And I said, we need to go to therapy. I was like, I need therapy. I was like, and you need to go with me.
I think that's really mature. Like, honestly speaking, like,
yeah, for
a 14-year-old kid to be like, hey, mom, let's go to therapy.
Yeah. But you know what? I think that because it was one, like, really, like, what? She took me seriously.
Right,
and I don't know what it was about that, but the fact that she took me seriously was like, oh, okay.
Look at
and she did. Serious. Yeah, and she did. And she looked up, we went, whatever. We had insurance. All our lives we had insurance. One of those privileges.
Right, for sure.
And so we went, and she found someone, and we went, and I started doing individual. And I think that a lot of things that were happening for me were normal for my age. Like where there was things like, I want to be able to hang out with my friends, and my mom doesn't let me. And a lot of it was religion-wise. Like, she wanted me to hang out with the religion homies. And I was like, nah, I want to hang out with my pagan friends.
They're squares. Can I live a little bit?
Yeah. And then again, not knowing how to advocate for myself, I was just sulking and like, she just doesn't let me do anything.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that that's what therapy did for me at the time, where they just gave me skills on how to like advocate for myself, talk to my mom about those things.
What was that one skill?
Identifying like what I wanted, and then how do I basic communication skills. How do I tell her like, I need this because of this? So I want to hang out with my friends because I feel happy when I hang out with my friends, right? Or that and it also helped to have like a third party person tell her like, these are also very normal things for a teenager to want. Like, that it's okay that she wants to hang out with her friends because it's developmentally appropriate. Because this is, whatever. Or that if I challenged her, it was also like normal because I'm figuring out my own identity and individuality. Right. And so I think these were concepts that she didn't understand. That she's fine, she's normal. She just was worried. And then also what they helped with, because we did have conjoint sessions, they helped with helping me understand where she was coming from. And that she was coming from a place of just also being worried about all these other things, right? That then they helped us communicate, because I remember one session where she was worried about like X, Y, and Z, da 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 da. And then I remember saying like, when have I given you a reason to think these things of me? And she was like, no, yeah. So she was basing like all these worries from like just outsider worries, and not necessarily because I had given her that context of being worried. So they helped kind of just manage those things, and it worked. Then our relationship improved.
Right. Okay. I mean, it seems like a lot of these questions that I have, they're kind of being answered as we go through the conversation, but I don't want to assume. What inspired you to study psychology at UCLA?
So I actually didn't study psychology at UCLA.
Okay.
I majored in sociology.
Okay.
And
there are some similarities, but they're completely different.
Right.
At the same time.
I majored in sociology and minored in education and Chicano studies.
Okay. Okay.
And so what inspired me, ironically, was I wanted to be a psychology major, and then I failed in my first class.
Really?
I didn't fail it. I just didn't do very well. And so I took that to mean that I wasn't going to be good at it.
Okay.
And I went for what I thought was safer. But again, whatever. But I think that it was helpful, because I think that I was much better at understanding these social constructs and ideas. That I enjoyed it a lot more. But again, I only took one psychology class.
Okay.
And again, at the time, my goal wasn't to become a therapist. My goal was to be a teacher. And so...
Really? Once upon a time, you wanted to be a teacher?
Yeah, for a really long time.
So what was that moment that made you realize, I don't want to be a teacher?
When I was unemployed, and I knew that I had graduated during the time where there was a lot of layoffs and cutoffs in the education system. And then I wasn't finding a job. And then it was apparent that I needed to go back to school. And I questioned my purpose in wanting to become an educator. And I realized that I wanted to become a teacher because I thought it was easier. And I'd always... Okay. Yeah. And I'd always done what was easy and chosen the easy routes. Yeah. And more than anything, it was... I thought psychology was so difficult. And being a therapist, I thought would be so difficult. That then I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But when you're in this moment of like questioning your life, right? And what am I doing, and what am I going to do with the rest of my life if I'm unemployed? I was like, you know what? I mean, I really got to challenge myself to that thing that I'm so afraid of. Right. Which I don't know why I was, but I was. And then, so I decided to instead apply for a master's psychology program.
So that's when you started finally kind of learning about the human mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like psychology, I think that in sociology, you also address like human minds, just like in a social perspective.
It's the group versus the individual.
And this was, so psychology is more of that individual, biological, and like the biology of things. And so it is a little different. But also like the concentration in the master's programs are just so different as well. Right. That it doesn't go into these details of psychology. Okay. But I have found that it's a great balance. I think the people that I've encountered in my field that tend to be much better at their job have a balance of both
sociology and psychology. I imagine so. Yeah. Because if you're only stuck within your own mind, how much can you understand about what's going on with people from this neighborhood, and that neighborhood, or this country, where they have a completely different culture? It definitely keeps your mind like in a certain lane if you haven't entertained these other contexts and things. And so, so I think it is, to me, I feel like it's happened, and I have found that I was like,
It was helpful that it happened that way.
For sure.
Because I do. Like, I think I'm much better at my job when I can understand the social aspect of things, but also the individual. And then I put them together, and it's like, poof.
And see, that's the aspect of life that I think is just completely magical. When you're living your life and you don't really know what the future is going to be like. But yet somehow it still ends up working out, not necessarily as best as it could have, but it ends up working out just fine.
Or maybe it is the best that it could have, you know? Like, how would we know?
But you never really know. Right? And so honestly, like, I hate to, but I love to bring, like, God into the conversation, because, like, the things that really made me believe in God is, like, I have no control sometimes of what the hell is going to happen in my life. But these wonderful things has happened. Like, I consider myself...
you have to attribute them to something.
Just like, who is it? Not me. How could it be me? I don't deserve to be blessed. I don't deserve to have all these nice things. Or do I?
Right.
You know? And so I imagine that, you know, through all the schooling that you've received, or maybe outside of school, through your own education, you've been able to define the word trauma. So what does trauma mean to you?
You know, I'll explain it to you how I used to explain it to the kids that when I worked with them.
That's best.
You know, sometimes these really, really scary things happen, and they happen to us, and then we have reactions to it, like we can't stop thinking about certain things, or they make us feel a certain way, or we're scared of these really scary things that have happened. And so, and it always happened, like we'd have this list of traumatic events, right, that happened to people.
So pick out the one that happened to you.
Right, and it's funny because that's what sometimes they ask you to do, but obviously I just, like, I'd ask, like, you know, sometimes these are some of the examples of scary things that happen. Tell me about the scary things that have happened to you. And sometimes kids will tell you, like, well, I saw a scary movie, and right, and to me it's like, that was to them, like, that's scary, right? That it could have very well been a traumatic event.
For sure.
And then I'll ask follow up, like, where does it scare you to the point where, like, you can't, like, do certain things, or, you know, like, are you always thinking about that scary moment? They'll be like, oh no, like, no. Okay. So I feel like a traumatic event is like a really scary thing that happens to us that then is affecting us, maybe in a day-to-day basis, or that it has some effect on us, where it might be impairing, like, our ability to do certain things. So, but I think everybody also has a very different definition of what traumatic events are and how scary they are.
Right.
I feel like trauma is like on a continuum, right? Something really scary to me might not be that big of a deal to you.
Right. Which, again, trauma is truly subjective then?
No, I think it's based on experience, yeah. And I think that, because I think that sometimes traumatic events happen to people that then they build resilience around those events. And so...
sometimes we can even lie to ourselves and be like, nah, that wasn't traumatic. I just got my ass beat by 10 people with a bat.
Right, and it may have not been, because maybe something worse has happened to you, and so then that's not that big of a deal.
Right.
But you're right, like, but it does get, that's why I say, like, I feel like it's a continuum.
Right.
And I think we're conditioned to think, like, things are black and white, and trauma is one of those things that you can't see, like, it's either this or it's that. It's just, it's an experience that happens for everybody differently.
Right.
And then you just have to take at face value what it means to that person to have experienced that. And you can't assume. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned, is that I can't assume that because you're going through this, it must be traumatic. But it's also difficult, right? Because a lot of the times these systems, right, are dictating what trauma is and imposing things. And so one example would be when court systems decide that a family who may be, or a child who is experiencing a certain thing in their family or in their home, it must be traumatic, so we have to remove these children. And while we know, right, that the research has shown, yes, that these events can be extremely traumatic, how that it's affecting that child, and is it affecting that child?
Right.
May be different. It may not even be affecting the child. And so so that's, I think, some of those struggles that I think we also have to deal with as clinicians, is that a lot of the times there's There's this imposing of like, you need to get all these things and do all these things because you must have trauma. And it's like, well, maybe they may have it, but is it presenting itself right now, and is it being exhibited? So there's a lot of controversy around those things, because we want to sometimes treat things that we can't treat in the moment because nothing's happening.
I get you. So for those of you watching today and they're wondering, well, how do I treat something that I'm feeling? But they're too scared to say, oh man, I don't want to be treated as a crazy person. I don't want to drink this or that. I don't want my family to look at me this way. I don't want my friends to see me this way. What is perhaps a sign? What is something that should alert them that it's a good idea to go see a therapist?
You know, the way that I always present it, and mostly also because we work a lot of the times with families who are being told that they have to get therapy and they're mandated to do it, and then they're like, I don't need it. And the way that I've always presented it to them is, how is whatever you're feeling or happening affecting different areas of your life?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the times people don't think, or you're not reflecting on like, is this affecting me or not? Because we are so on the go, living day to day, that we don't stop to think, is this affecting me, right? But is it impairing your relationships with people?
Yeah.
Is it affecting how you engage with your children, with your spouse, with, is it even affecting like whether you even engage with anybody? Like maybe you don't talk to anybody, or you're isolated and you don't have friends. And maybe you're okay with that. And so that's different. Yeah. So to me, the way that I see it is like, if there's something that you feel like you need to change, that you want to change, then that should be your probably first, but you don't know how to change it, then maybe that's your first clue. Like, maybe I want to get feedback. Because I think that for me, the way that therapy works is also like you bouncing ideas off of someone else. And I think that the misconception of therapy is that people are going to tell you what to do, or that this therapist is going to tell you.
Like advice, you're going to figure it out, you're going to come out a new person.
Right. And that's really not what people should expect. That they should expect to be guided into their own solutions, right? Because you are the expert in your own life, and I am merely a vessel of like, where you can throw these things at me and then I can shoot them back at you to see if you see something different when I shoot them back at you. And I don't know, sometimes, I don't know about you, but for me, talking to myself, talking out loud about something that I've been thinking,
man, I talk to myself like,
makes me then see it like,
crazy.
Whoa, wait, I just saw something else differently.
Right.
And I think that is the power of like therapy, right? To just be able to like
it's a reflective process in a sense,
right? And to be able to verbalize it, because I think that a lot of the times people are like, it's cool, like I think about these things all the time, but what happens when we keep things in our head is that we tend to just spin, because it's just here and it's contained. And so when you can, I think, like express it and verbalize it, you hear it differently. Right. And I think that is also like how powerful it is, which is also why like this concept of therapy, right, is also different in different cultures, because I think different cultures have the concept of therapy. It just doesn't look the way that it looks like in America, right?
Yeah.
And so one way that I've always like thought about it is like my tias, when they sit around and just talk, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen it, but
I was a little
when they
kid.
just sit around and they start telling each other stories about, cuando estábamos acá.
One of the most beautiful things ever.
Yes. But that's how they're processing, and a lot of the times there's traumatic experiences within that, and I almost feel like it's how you guys process your trauma, and how you guys are processing how those experiences shaped you by sharing it with each other and then just talking it out, and then they laugh, right? And
perfect. Yeah,
and so to me it's like I love to witness that, because I feel like it's the best form of therapy. But also, we know that like in our culture, like talking and the narratives, and telling each other, the storytelling is a way of like, it's a therapeutic intervention. Yeah,
we had to storytell because most of our stories were burned down by the colonizers.
Right.
And earlier you said something really important about how people are way too busy working that they never find the free time to think about their freedom. And I what really made me think about that was a song by Immortal Technique, and the song is "The Poverty of Philosophy," where he says most brown and poor black people in the hood hardly have time to think about freedom in this in civilization, in our civilization. And I was like, yeah, dude, that's most of our parents, most of our family members. Is every day, you know, they're working 40 hours, maybe 50, maybe 60. They get home, they don't even have time for the kids. They open up a chela, drink, maybe watch a stupid episode of something, and then go to sleep, and then repeat the process. Every day is the same thing. And it's like, where do they have the space to think about how they are harming their children? They're harming themselves. They can't escape the cycle of hurting one another, of trauma. And so I think it's a very sad thing.
It is.
That is also another aspect of like a hyper-capitalistic society.
For sure, it's about capitalism, and then it is a socioeconomic. It's a problem, right? Because then it comes with, again, like when you have privilege to have that time, right? For example, the professionals, right? Where we get to get out early sometimes from work, and I get to take time off so that then I can go to my therapy session.
For sure.
So I can get that 1 hour a week to just shoot stuff. It's not just chill. Okay. Sometimes I feel like it's work for me too. But that's where you're just right, because and I as a professional have had weeks where I don't have time. Like I'd get homework assignments from my therapist, and then I'd show up and I'd be like, I didn't have time this week, right? Because the only time I gave myself permission to do that was that 1 hour in therapy. So can you imagine if as a professional I sometimes don't even have time for that? Like as a disenfranchised person who has to work.
Even worse, who then has to come home and worry about like, damn, like I don't got food. Cooking. Right. Yeah, the rent. No, when am I going to think about like the meaning of life? I'm thinking about like survival. Exactly. And again, you know, we consider those things. The needs. The hierarchy of needs. Yeah. And so sometimes that's where we got to start, right? When for me, who I've worked in the community, you know, but I think that starting with that though, and the exposure is the goal. On a bigger picture, you know, that we get our people introduced to this concept and this idea of giving yourself space and time to think and reflect about these things, because it is affecting our children on a grander scale, and it's affecting generations to come. And so I feel like at least for me going into this field, it's been about like, how do we reshape or how do we introduce these concepts within our communities and make them fit within the culture in the community, so that then we help our familias and our moms and parents and dads to build safer homes, and you know, and that then at the end of the day also create more successful children that then are also able to achieve higher education. Because then I think for me that was how I came into this field. Like your aha moment. My aha moment was like, I want to make a change within education, right? And then when I knew that, like, but I also want to do mental health, I was like, well, you know what? I can still have an effect on education through this mental health piece, because by working on the kids that are going to be educated.
Because the reality of also higher education and you being able to achieve higher education comes with the set of like, do you have the coping skills? What skills do you have that are going to help you? You're met by obstacles. Right. That because you're having to deal with all these other things in your society, in your environment. Yeah. And then mentally, that a lot of the time, that's why these kids aren't able to like achieve higher education. Right. Because when are they going to do that when they're dealing with just like, like this anxiety, right? With the anxiety of the instability and uncertainty of like just life. And so I feel like that's kind of like where I know I'm not alone on that. I know that there's a lot of me and my colleagues who feel that way, where like this is how we effectuate change, you know, in our communities and our culture. Right. While reshaping it in how we feel like it fits our families best.
For sure. We talked a little bit about how capitalism you work so much, how it affects the mental health. Now, how does like white supremacy, patriarchal standards of survival, how do those things affect our inability to heal from trauma that we've experienced in our lives? And I can't forget about homophobia either.
Right.
Right. There's all these systematic issues in society that don't allow us to be our fullest selves because we're afraid that we won't be accepted, that we won't be loved, that we won't be cared for, and sometimes we can't even express ourselves because you know that certain standards are there and yourself, who you are, is not going to meet that standard. So how do those things affect our inability to find healing?
Well, I think, I mean, more so than like the inability to find healing, I think that it's about the stories that are being told through these systems or these like that we're being told, like even like in a the patriarchy of things, right? That I feel like, because I know that much better as a woman, right? That I know that the stories that I've been told about me, right, and who I am and who I should be, are coming from a perspective of men, and men also imposing a lot of things, and so then the stories that I've been told about who I am are stories that then I inevitably identify with, and I think that is the barrier, that when you don't know about the stories you tell yourself, that then feed into the behaviors and how you behave, then we really don't have an understanding about where the behavior is coming from. So it's difficult to change it because I don't know why I'm doing it. And so I'll give you an example. I feel like I have functioned a lot through this lens of being accepted and being, because that's been the stories that I've been told.
Being accepted by who?
So in different ways, right? Okay. But as a woman, right, I'm being told that my job is to please men, right? And to somehow like behave in a way that is accepted by men. Because sometimes the things that I might do or say are not like accepted.
Pleasant to me.
To men, right? Because I may be challenging the norm. And so this is one of those things where, like, I think when relationships, right, and there's this constant battle of, am I responding in this way? I really want to respond this way, but this way is not like the way that I should, because then this is also going to lead to me emasculating men, for example. Because if I do this, then that, so then men are going to feel like less than. And so when you're functioning from that all the time, and you're not reflective of it, I feel like you can lead into feeling like you're not being yourself and you're not being authentic to yourself. If you're constantly challenging yourself. But I know a lot of mujeres who, like, this is the constant internal struggle, you know, of like finding your identity and finding yourself while also having to struggle with these ideas of what we're supposed to be and should be. And then the perception of, and then what people think of you because you're not behaving in ways that you should. And again, like, I think that a lot of the times these things are perpetuated by other people. So I think that then that affects also like our mental space. So again, for me, like, I fed myself these stories, but then I was unhappy, and I was unhappy about who I was and the unhappiness and the feelings, and I couldn't pinpoint, like, why am I unhappy? And it's because the behavior, right, how I'm behaving in these spaces is not being true to who I really want to be. And so again, if I'm not questioning that, then I'm just behaving and I'm unhappy, and I'm behaving and I'm unhappy, and nothing is changing. And when I became aware, when I was like, okay, let me reflect on that, I was like, okay, so now I know the source of my unhappiness. And if I don't want to be unhappy, then that means I have to, like,
be more of your real self.
Be more of my real self.
What is a real example of a man being emasculated?
I think it's a feeling that men get. I don't know.
But what would it look like? Like, for example, like, I'm thinking, like, what if, like, is it the tone? Is it, like,
I'd really like to know.
That's what I'm really curious about.
Question for men, because I think as a woman I've heard, like, you know, that's emasculating, and I hear it from men, so I'm like, okay, I don't know what that's like for you. Okay. Do tell.
I guess it's a better question for men.
Yeah, and I don't think, and I would want to know if men can actually
emasculation. It's a tough conversation to have because what does it look like? Like, what is it actually for me to be emasculated?
Well, I think that I mean, I don't know what it feels like for men, but I think that the way that I perceive it as a woman is sometimes I ask, is that thing that like that I ask to identify is, well, is that thing that happened or that your girl did, or that upset you or made you upset, is it if your friends or your buddies did the same thing, or if anybody else that wasn't a woman did it, would you feel the same way? And a lot of the times it's not, right? Because like and a lot of times I've heard from men is like, well, no, but like I can do that with my buddies and like it's all fun and games, but if your girl does it, it's not fun and games. And so I think that is the difference. That why then do you perceive that same behavior differently when your girl does it and then versus when your friends do it?
Right.
So I think, again, it's just one of those things where you can question and reflect on, why do I feel differently about the same situation?
Right.
Depending on who it is that it's coming from.
Yeah. And that's totally relatable. I think that clarifies it for me as to, like, do I feel emasculated? Why am I feeling emasculated? Is it a power issue? Most likely. Because the homie says something I never tread. All of a sudden, my girl says something. I'm like, what? Putting me on the spot like this?
Right.
So it's very interesting. So moving forward, how would you say that historical trauma affects us as a group of people who essentially are the descendants of colonized peoples?
Man, that is a really loaded question, but which I hope I can answer in some way. But I think that historical trauma within our peoples is so complex, because it looks differently for everybody as an individual.
Okay.
But then when you add all these other social implications that cause traumatic events to happen to an entire like country, like for instance El Salvador, and a lot of Salvadorians like experiencing like just that warfare within their country is traumatic. And
for sure.
And then you add the trauma of migrating, and the things that happen when you're migrating. It's like levels and layers and layers and layers of trauma, because then, most of the time they're already coming with trauma within their own homes, whether it was physical abuse, sexual abuse. So then you just have these layers and layers of trauma that people then find their own ways of coping with that, and a lot of the times they're not helpful skills. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. And I think that within that context, at least here, right, in the United States, then figuring out how then you treat that trauma that is just so many layers in, can be challenging, because a lot of the times it's just about educating the families about, or the individual about what happened to them, it not being something that happens to everyone.
Right.
Because again, when you're coming from a country where it is happening to everyone, this is normalized. And so for me, a lot of the times it's been about like just educating people about like, this doesn't happen to everybody, and probably like what is happening and how you're behaving is as a result of one, either having to suppress, right, that trauma in order to be able to function and live day to day, or you're unable to suppress it no more, right, because it's just like already here and it's coming up, because it does eventually. I think for anybody, traumatic experiences at some point always come up, and they come up in different ways.
Right.
Whether it be like within your relationship with your partner, within your relationships with people at work, within your relationships with your children, there's triggering events. Maybe for a lot of people, like when they have children, the trauma is relived, because maybe now
we toss down everything to them, and as some of my elders say, it's carga. Like every day we have a backpack and it's full of all our little traumatic experiences, and for whatever reason, I don't know if we feel better or what the thing is, but we pass it down to our siblings, to our kids. Usually I've noticed that by the time that you hit like the age of a grandparent, you've evolved, and you definitely don't treat your grandchildren the same way that you treated your grandkids.
Right.
Which is also interesting.
It is. And I don't know that it's necessarily like about having processed traumatic events.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's more about like you're tired.
Yeah. So you don't even have the energy to go freaking darte unas nalgadas.
That, and then you're just, I think that the age and wherever you're at in your life, you do see things differently. And there's different goals and there's different values. And I think that there's no way of taking that away from people, that the older you get or wherever you're at in life, your values are changing. And so maybe it's not important anymore because they're not your children, right? So you're not focusing on the same things that you were focusing with your children.
Right.
But also, you don't have probably those financial responsibilities or stressors that you had when you were raising your own children, right. Which lightens the carga.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because then now, right, maybe now I actually have time to play with my grandchild. I didn't have it with my kids because I was working. But now I don't work as much.
Yeah, now I'm retired.
I'm retired, or if you have that luck to be retired. But now I can actually spend that time with my grandchild.
For sure.
But yeah, like I think definitely transgenerational trauma is very real, and it's more about what we pass down. I think is behavior and how we respond to things and how we engage and relate, how we are taught to engage and relate to others. Is also based off of our experiences and our lived experience. And so if you're always cautious about people, and this is a great example, like my mom always teaching me about how you didn't have friends, right? And nobody is your friend. And you should not trust anybody because nobody is your friend.
That's so crazy.
Right. And so then you lead a very isolated life because your parent has taught you that like you shouldn't trust anybody. And so again, like whatever might have happened to her that led her to then have to respond that way is now passed down onto me. And now I'm like super cautious and like now I don't trust people. And then I'm like, I don't know if I want to be your friend because, because inherently I'm thinking like you shouldn't be trusted.
At a subconscious level, you're always like mistrusting, you're paranoid, you're just like, I can't have any friends.
On a subconscious level.
Yeah.
And then you add my own experience where then maybe something happened.
Someone actually did you dirty.
Yes. And now I'm like, my mom was right.
After all.
Yeah. And then, and then you're adding that. So then now I'm probably going to pass that down onto my child if I'm not aware of that.
I was going to say, like, will you?
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to pass down some stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, like I think that I'm being very reflective about what things do I want to pass down and what things do I not. Probably the things that I'm aware of, I'm going to work at not passing them down, but I'm sure there's things I'm not aware of yet.
What percentage of our bad qualities are we aware of?
I don't know. That's maybe something worthy of researching.
For sure.
Yeah.
Because
I don't know that we...
That's what I'm really afraid of, is just passing down all the dumb stuff that I do to my kids. And ideally, I would heal from all the trauma.
Ideally.
Before I can begin to bear any children. Because, I mean, it's a big question, like, when are you ready? When should you have them? How should you have them? And when you do... How do you raise them? I think is my biggest question, as far as like.
And I think that's a question everybody asks themselves, and I don't know that it's a question you answer ever. And I just on my experience of working with parents feel like even when you're a parent, you're like, I don't know that I'm doing this right. And again, I think that a tool that is really helpful for parents that are already parents and parents who want to be is to be reflective about the things that you really liked about your parents and that experience growing up and the things that you didn't, and what things do you want to pass down and what things do you not, and then you can start thinking about what is it that I didn't like about that and how did it make me feel and why don't I want to pass that down. And physical discipline, for instance, is one of those where people will be like, well, that worked for me.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm going to hit my kid.
I'm going to grab a pen and smack him in the head.
Yeah, because, that's how it made me. And then I always ask, did it really make you a better person? Or
did it just make you fearful?
Did it make you fearful?
Which, in the long run, I think is far more worse.
Right. Or did it make you feel like you weren't seen or you were not unworthy? And then, are you functioning from being unworthy now? And are the issues you're having now still stemming from you feeling like you're not good enough? because somebody made you feel unworthy, because they hit you so much. So again, right?
That's fucked up.
Yeah, or not respected, right? Which a lot of the times we make children feel like they're not worthy of respect. And if that's the story that you're being told, then when you're an adult, that's what you're looking for in your interactions with other people. And that's what you're attracting. You're attracting people who are not respecting you because it's what you know. And it's comfortable and it's safe.
Yeah.
So,
it's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. And if you're not aware, you're just repeating the same things. So again, it's all about like questioning, like where am I at and where do I want to be? While also looking at the context of our people and the people that came before us. And how do I compare, to that? And not in a bad way, but more like how have we evolved?
Right.
And I question that all the time as well, where I look at my grandparents and the intergenerational trauma, but also the internalized racism in our families, and how we've come a long way in just being more verbal about acknowledging
the colorism
that exists even within our families.
Yeah.
And so again, it's progress, and always thinking about progress being looking at progress as like that's what we want. We don't want to be perfect, and we don't want things to be like, oh my god, amazing, but progress is always like moving. You're moving somewhere.
Yeah. And I always think about Frederick Douglass's quote, which is basically, there is no progress without struggle. And like I'm not even advocating like struggling every single day, because that's some BS. Like, enjoy yourselves, have fun, and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, you need to push for whatever you want to see, right? And if you're not even trying to change like the simple structures in your home, like what can you expect to see later on in life? So let's say some people are watching you, like they're getting pumped. They're like, you know what?
I want to go to therapy.
I want to not necessarily just go to therapy, but what are some steps that they can take, leaving this episode today and say, like, you know what, I can do this because I'm feeling pumped, and I can actually begin to heal from some of this trauma that you might not even know that you possess or that you're a part of, but you have a feeling. Trust your gut. This feeling is telling you feel ill, you're feeling trauma, you know that you come from this line of people. What can we do?
I think that what's important is to also not have high expectations, and to that even acknowledging, like, I think I might, or having the passing thought of, I think I might want to do something like this or explore these things about myself, it's a big step.
Yeah.
And not have the expectation that you're going to figure it all out right away, or that you're going to find the right person to do that with. I think that as a person who has been in therapy for a long time, as a therapist, and just having had to look for different therapists because they weren't all great or fitting me, I realized that, like, it's a very intimate relationship that you're developing with someone.
Oh, yeah.
More importantly, it's because you're developing with yourself, because it's about you being real with yourself. And so how real you can be with yourself is how much progress you're also going to see.
Key.
So, and it's also okay if this is your first time, right, being vulnerable with yourself, or putting your really inner, deep, dark secrets out, that you may also not be ready for that, and that's okay. But there's always you got to take a first step, and then you may not find the right person. And I think that for me is what I always tell everybody is, if you feel like I'm going to take the plunge and I'm going to look for someone, that first person you look for it's probably not going to be it, and it's okay. And so acknowledge, like, that person is not fitting my personality, and move on to looking for another one, because that doesn't necessarily mean that therapy doesn't work. It just means that person didn't work for you. We all have different styles, we all have different perspectives, different trainings, different experience, and again, we also have very different life experience. And a lot of the time, the life experience that your therapist comes with is also going to shape how they view you and how they're able to guide you in that process. So I always encourage people to, like, look and do the trial and error thing before they say it doesn't work. I'm also a proponent of therapy is not for everybody, and some people find therapeutic spaces that are not
one-on-one.
that are not your what is the
typical
word? Yeah, like the typical therapeutic setting.
Yeah.
A lot of people find therapeutic spaces in their churches, and that works.
Which
for them.
I understand like completely, because like my mom.
That's what that is for her.
It makes me realize why she's been going to church for so long,
Mm-hmm.
because it's her space of refuge.
Yeah.
You know, especially in her younger days when she would deal with more trauma that was being unleashed because of my dad, or thrown upon by my dad.
Mm-hmm.
That's where she would go for 2 hours or 4 hours a week, where she would just be like,
of relief.
No tengo que ver a este güey.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
relief. Yeah, and you don't know, and then also those interactions that where you're having with other people may be refreshing and cathartic.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, I think that therapy should be something that you find is what is helping you.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a specific way that things have to be done, but I know that like sometimes people feel like I need something,
Mm-hmm.
and so you just have to find that something. For me, it's therapy. For other people, it's friendships and hanging out with friends, and what is most helpful to you. Because again, who are we to say that what you're doing is not helpful? If going to church, is what helps you, then that sounds therapeutic to me, because it sounds like you're finding some relief to whatever stressor you are experiencing.
Right. And so, like, another form of therapy that's not one-to-one that I found, like, personally very helpful is group therapy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a spot in East LA. It's called the Hombre Círculo. It is only for men, although there are similar circles for women. And I wonder about the theys, the thems, the people who are not on this side or that side. My elder said that they're allowed in any space.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because they share both the sun and the moon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so interesting. And he talks about
Spiritual.
he talks about how like thousands of years ago there was always trans people, and how they were always allowed to just go wherever you felt, whether you wanted to hit the drums,
cool.
or use the harp or whatever. And I found this to be so beautiful. And that's the thing that we're lacking today in society, is that compassion and that allowance for people to be free.
Yeah.
Like, dude, what do you want to feel like? You want to feel like a man today? Handle it. You want to feel like a woman tomorrow? Handle it. I don't understand why it's so difficult for people to just be like, dude, be yourself. And that's one of those things that I struggle the most with, because I just find so simple. Like, you feel like that? Great.
Right, and being yourself is easy for somebody who may know what you being yourself is. But if you don't, then that is really difficult, right? Because then who am I?
Right.
Or you're being told this is what you are.
Yeah.
But then you're like, but that's really not who I am.
Yeah.
So I think that that's where the conflict arises. But then finding those spaces where you find people who are like-minded and who feel the same way, I think that's also therapeutic. So finding those spaces. But going back to your question, because I don't think I really answered it, I think that depending on your needs and where you're at, I think that there's different spaces and opportunities for people to look for therapy. Obviously, for people who have insurance, I always say like the first step is use your insurance. Although I must add, like probably for people of color, it's going to be difficult to find people that maybe you are aligned with, or might understand your struggle and your experience. But then there's also psychologytoday.com. That's where most therapists advertise themselves. And so then that's, I think, a really good resource for people who are starting to look to see like, okay, what is out there within my area. Mm-hmm. People who do private practice, again, sometimes they take insurance, or they take sliding scale, which means they base your pay based off of how much you make.
How much money you make.
So there's those options. And then obviously also if you are low income and you have Medi-Cal, so then there's Medi-Cal services, like services for people in the community who are low income, for children as well. So I think that there's always people, and because it's a growing field, there's a lot more talk about mental health. But if you're finding like you're struggling as a parent and your child needs services, there's definitely a lot of services for children, more services I think for families and children in LA County. And it's much easier to navigate those systems versus when you're an adult and you're an individual, because it takes a lot more action and personal action, and you really going out and looking for that. But also if you're struggling as an adult, and you have a full-time job, asking your employer, do they have services that they offer to the employees for when you're struggling in different areas?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. And so finally, I really appreciate when we leave our audience with something tangible, something useful, a tool, something resourceful that they can utilize leaving today. I know that we've already kind of given a lot of different steps, but if there's one final thing that you would really like for them to take, what would it be?
I think that what has been really useful for me, it's practicing acceptance and being mindful. And I know that mindfulness is a really big talk as of late. And I think it's a really great tool to start off with for people to like really practice being in the moment and, you know, doing the deep breathing. I think those are really good steps to start with when you've got like no other tools or skills. And I think I had skills and tools, but yoga really initiated me into this mindfulness piece. Because
you gotta be present.
Cause you can't do a lot of the stuff if you're not. And because I'm anxious and always like in my mind about like all these other things.
You start to live in that
moment. I'm not gonna be able to do that movement if I'm not really present with my body in that moment. So I mean, as something tangible, I think yoga is a really great place to start, and that it's also safe because you're not like questioning or thinking critically. You're just really being and focusing on that. So I think that that's really useful to start as a tool to begin to also be more mindful.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for showing up on the show today. I appreciate it. This was amazing. I really hope you guys paid attention, took some notes, whatever. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to the world. It can be very useful. As always, I love you guys, and I'll catch you guys next time.